One quiet afternoon on a Virginia highway, a veteran cop thought he was pulling over just another black driver. What he didn't know was that the man behind the wheel was the newly elected governor, and that this encounter would expose his deepest bias, shake an entire community, and ignite a lesson about power, respect, and justice that no one in that room would ever forget. The afternoon sun bled across Route 29, casting long golden streaks over the asphalt. The highway was quiet, deceptively ordinary, until a single moment set everything into motion. What should have been a routine traffic stop would soon unravel into something far larger, an encounter that would expose arrogance, prejudice, and a truth too heavy to ignore. Officer Ted Marshall sat in his patrol car, his eyes sweeping the road like a predator in wait. 2 decades on the force had sharpened him into a figure both feared and resented. Locals whispered about his habits, the way his attention seemed to fall more often on black drivers. Nothing proven, nothing written, but the stories clung to his name like smoke. From a distance, a sleek black SUV approached, moving smooth, just over the limit. Marshall's lips twitched into a grin as his hand hovered over the siren. "Gotcha," he muttered, relishing the small surge of control. The vehicle obeyed, sliding to the shoulder. The window rolled down, revealing a young black man dressed in a tailored suit. His demeanor was striking, calm, assured, untouched by the weight Marshall tried to impose. "License and registration," Marshall barked, sharp and clipped. The man handed them over instantly. No hesitation. No tremor in his hands. Just a steady nod, his gaze unwavering. The documents were flawless. No reason for concern. Yet Marshall lingered, suspicion gnawing not at the paperwork but at the man himself. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he pressed, his voice dripping with condescension. "I assume you'll tell me," came the even reply. Respectful, yet firm. Marshall's frown deepened. The lack of fear irritated him. "You were speeding?" he declared flatly. The words sounded weak even to his own ears. "Step out of the vehicle." The man complied, moving with measured grace, his posture tall, unbroken. He stood before Marshall not with defiance, not with submission, but with presence. "What brings you out here?" Marshall asked, circling the SUV as if searching for a flaw. "Work," the man replied simply, folding his hands loosely in front of him. Marshall narrowed his eyes, suspicion feeding not on evidence but on bias. "You seem awfully calm for someone who just got pulled over. Got something to hide?" A faint smile touched the man's lips. His voice was calm, deliberate. "No, officer, do you?" The words struck like a match in the silence. Marshall stiffened, his authority momentarily shaken. He loomed closer, desperate to reclaim control, but unease crept beneath his skin. The man's composure was unnerving, a mirror reflecting his own aggression back at him. "Open the trunk," Marshall demanded, tapping the SUV with his flashlight as if to brand it. "Is there a problem with my documents?" the man asked, still calm. "Just open it," Marshall snapped. The trunk rose with a soft click. Inside sat a leather briefcase and a neatly packed duffel. Shirts folded crisp, a shaving kit tucked neatly to the side. Nothing suspicious, nothing illegal, just order and discipline. Marshall pawed through the belongings with careless hands, unfolding clothes, clutching the shaving kit as if it were damning evidence. "Traveling for work? What kind of job needs a wardrobe like this?" The man leaned against his vehicle, arms crossed casually. "The kind where appearances matter." "Should I be worried about the way you're handling my things?" Marshall sneered. "You're bold for someone pulled over on my highway." The man tilted his head. "Your highway? I didn't realize Route 29 was private property." The officer stepped closer, toe to toe, his voice low and threatening. "You've got a smart mouth. That might not end well for you." The man's eyes darkened, his voice steady and sharp. "Officer, are you sure you want to keep going down this road?" Marshall scoffed. "Is that a threat?" "No," the man replied calmly. "It's a question." A passing car slowed, children in the back pressing their faces to the glass, watching. Marshall's chest tightened as the eyes of strangers bore into the moment. "You can stop with the theatrics," the man said firmly. "I'm not who you think I am." And you're about to find that out. Marshall turned sharply, pride pushing him back to the cruiser. He typed the man's name into the computer, expecting nothing. But when the results flashed across the screen, the air left his lungs. Elijah Porter, Governor of Virginia. Newly elected. The most powerful man in the state, Marshall froze. His authority crumbled in an instant. Through the windshield, Elijah leaned casually against his SUV, watching with an unreadable expression. The officer stepped out, his confidence drained, his voice trembling at the edges. "Governor Porter," he managed, his tone no longer commanding but subdued. Elijah pushed off the car, approaching slowly, his eyes locked on the officer. "So," he said, calm and measured. "What now, Officer Marshall?" The balance of power had flipped, and for the first time in years, Ted Marshall realized he was no longer the one in control. "I broke no laws," Elijah said calmly, his voice sharp as glass. "And yet here we are. Tell me why." Marshall opened his mouth, but no words came. His throat worked, his jaw clenched, but the only sound that escaped was a hollow mutter. "I was just doing my job." Even as he spoke, the lie rang in his ears. He gripped his belt like it was the only thing tethering him to control. Elijah's brow lifted slightly. His gaze was steady, his tone almost pitying. "Your job?" He gestured toward the open trunk, the shirts and personal items tossed carelessly aside. "Is that what you call this? Do you pull over every driver this way? Or just the ones who look like me?" Marshall's face reddened. His lips parted, but nothing came out. He lowered his eyes, unable to meet Elijah's. Finally, in a voice barely audible, he muttered, I didn't know who you were." "Exactly," Elijah replied, his voice sharpening, his calmness turning into something colder. "You didn't know who I was. But you assumed you could treat me like this, dismiss me, humiliate me, intimidate me. Why? Because of my skin? Because of the car I drive? Tell me, Officer Marshall, what made you decide I was worth less than respect?" The silence between them grew unbearable. Marshall's fists clenched at his sides, not out of anger, but shame. He started to speak, but Elijah raised a hand, silencing him with quiet authority. "Save it," Elijah said, his voice firm but not cruel. "I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to teach you. Whether you learn is up to you." Confusion flickered across Marshall's face. "Teach me?" "Yes," Elijah nodded. "You're coming with me. Tonight there's a community forum not far from here. You're going to sit in that room and listen. You'll hear the voices of the people you claim to serve. Maybe then you'll understand the impact of what just happened here. Maybe then you'll see the bigger picture." Marshall blinked, stunned. "You want me to go to a forum?" "I don't want you to," Elijah corrected. His voice was calm but unyielding. "I'm telling you to, as your governor." The words landed like stone. Marshall hesitated, pride battling against the weight of the truth. But deep down he knew he had no choice. His voice came out rough, stripped of bravado. "Fine." Elijah stepped closer, his eyes locked on Marshall's. His voice softened but carried an edge that couldn't be ignored. "This isn't about embarrassing you. It's about ensuring you never treat anyone this way again. Not because you're afraid of who they might be, but because you finally learned to respect everyone equally." The officer swallowed hard, the words cutting deeper than he expected. He gave a reluctant nod, but his face betrayed the storm brewing inside. "Good," Elijah said, turning toward his SUV. "Follow me. You'll sit front and center." The drive to Charlottesville felt endless. Marshall's hands gripped the wheel, his chest heavy with dread. By the time the cars pulled into the small community center, a crowd had already gathered. Voices rose in quiet waves, anticipation, frustration, hope. Inside, folding chairs filled the modest hall. At the front, a microphone waited like a spotlight for voices too long ignored. Elijah gestured for Marshall to enter first. The room grew tense the moment the officer stepped inside. Eyes turned toward him, men, women, teenagers, faces hardened by lived experience. His uniform, once a shield of authority, now clung to him like a scarlet letter. He felt stripped, exposed, judged in silence. Elijah led him to the front row. Marshall sat stiffly, his knees rigid, his hands clasped tight. Elijah approached the microphone, his voice steady but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for being here. This forum exists because your voices matter. Too often those in power forget that. Tonight we are here to listen, to learn, and to grow. Myself included, and those who wear the badge included as well." His eyes flicked briefly toward Marshall, pointed but calm. The murmurs swelled. Then, one by one, speakers came forward. A woman with weary eyes spoke first. "My son was pulled over last year. 17 years old. Just got his license. The officer said his tail light was out. The next morning we checked. It wasn't. My boy was so scared. He whispered on the phone to me, too afraid to even move for his license." Her voice cracked. "Do you know what that does to a mother?" Marshall's throat tightened. He shifted in his seat, but he couldn't look away. A young man followed, recounting how he was frisked while walking home because he fit a description. An elderly man spoke of the fear that gnawed at him every time his grandchildren left the house. A teenage girl described being questioned for simply existing in a neighborhood deemed too nice. Each story chipped away at the armor Marshall had carried for decades. His defenses cracked. The excuses he once leaned on felt hollow. Then, a boy no older than 10 walked up to the microphone. His tiny hands gripped the stand. His voice was small, but it cut sharper than any accusation. "My dad tells me to always be polite to police," he said. "But sometimes, I think even if I'm polite, they won't like me anyway." "Is that true?" The silence was suffocating. Marshall's chest ached as the boy stepped down, his question hanging in the air unanswered. Elijah returned to the microphone, his voice low and heavy. "This is why we're here. To face the truth. To own the damage. To make sure the next generation doesn't grow up believing that respect is only a one-way street." His gaze shifted, landing squarely on Marshall. "Officer Marshall, would you like to speak?" Every eye turned toward him. The officer froze, sweat prickling his neck. For a long moment he couldn't move. Then with effort he rose. His voice was rough, unsteady, stripped bare. I spent years thinking I was doing my job, thinking I was enforcing the law. But tonight, I realize I've been enforcing my own bias instead." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "And for that, I'm sorry." A ripple passed through the crowd. Surprise, skepticism, a faint flicker of hope. "I don't expect forgiveness," Marshall continued, forcing himself to meet their eyes. "And I don't expect trust overnight. But I promise this, I will do better. I will listen. I will learn. And I will make sure my actions reflect the respect every one of you deserves." The room was silent, holding its breath. Then slowly, a single pair of hands began to clap. Others joined in, louder, stronger, until the applause filled the hall, echoing like thunder. Marshall's throat tightened, not from shame, but from something unfamiliar. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. When the forum ended, the crowd dispersed, but Marshall stayed behind. Alone in the front row, his head bowed, his thoughts heavy. The weight of the night pressed down on him, and for the first time in his 20 years of service, he realized his journey had only just begun. Elijah stood before him for a long moment in silence, his eyes steady, his presence carrying more weight than any uniform ever could. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, deliberate. "Tonight you did something most people never get the chance to do," he said. "You admitted you were wrong. That's the first step. But don't mistake it for the last." Marshall lifted his head, his face etched with both relief and exhaustion. His voice was quiet, almost fragile. "I don't even know where to begin." "You begin by showing up," Elijah replied. His tone was calm, but every syllable cut with clarity. "Not just tonight. Not just when you're forced to. But every time you're needed. Show up to listen. Show up to learn. Show up to change. That's how trust is earned. Not with apologies, but with actions." Marshall nodded slowly, the simplicity of the words striking deeper than he expected. "I want to be better," he whispered, his voice unsteady, but sincere. Elijah studied him, then offered the faintest of smiles. Then be better. It's as simple, and as hard, as that. They walked side by side into the cool night air. The community center's hum of voices faded behind them. For the first time that evening, Marshall felt something loosen in his chest, though the road ahead still loomed long and unforgiving. At the edge of the lot, Elijah stopped by his SUV and turned one last time. "You know," he said, his tone softer now, "people like you are why I ran for office. Not to punish, to change. Because I believe people can learn. Even you, Officer Marshall." A dry, almost self-mocking chuckle escaped Marshall. "I guess I've got a lot of learning to do." "We all do," Elijah answered. He opened his car door but paused, locking eyes with the officer one final time. "Remember, this isn't just about you. It's about the people you serve. Don't ever forget that." The governor drove away, the SUV's taillights glowing red as they disappeared into the night. Marshall stood there, motionless, the quiet pressing in around him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man enforcing the law. He felt like a man trying to understand it. The next day, Ted Marshall reported back to duty. But this time, a small notebook rested in his pocket. In it, he began jotting down questions he had never bothered to ask before. He attended forums he would have ignored. He held conversations he once avoided. The voices from that community hall echoed in his mind. The trembling mother, the weary grandfather, the fearless boy. They became reminders of the lives his badge had the power to touch and the harm his silence could cause. Months passed. Then, one morning, Elijah Porter opened a letter on his desk. Inside was a handwritten note along with a photograph. The letter was from Marshall. The photo showed the formation of a newly established community police relations board. Officers and residents seated together at one long table. In his note, Marshall had written, "I still have a lot to learn, but I'm learning. Thank you for giving me the chance to see things differently." Elijah leaned back in his chair, the letter resting in his hand. His thoughts drifted back to the small boy who had asked the most piercing question of that night. "Even if I'm polite, they won't like me anyway. Is that true?" The truth was complicated. Elijah knew the scars of history could not be erased in a single night. But as he held the letter, a spark of hope stirred within him, that one day the boy's question would no longer hang in the air unanswered. One day respect would not be rationed, bartered, or demanded at the end of a badge or a gavel. It would be given freely, simply because it was right. The story of Governor Elijah Porter and Officer Ted Marshall is not just about one night on a lonely stretch of highway. It is a reminder that change begins with acknowledgement and grows only through action. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself where you can show up, where you can listen, where you can learn, and where you can choose to be better. Because the world does not change with silence. It changes when ordinary people decide to act. If this story stirred something in you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold truths, stories that challenge, stories that expose, and stories that remind us what humanity could be.